Sir, I need you to keep moving. This area is reserved. The voice came from a young man in a private security uniform who had the bearing of someone recently granted authority and not yet entirely comfortable in it. Not cruel, not contemptuous, but possessed of the particular certainty of a person who has been given a rule and has not yet been given the context that would make the rule complicated. He stood at the rope line in front of the Fallen Soldiers Memorial at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, his arms loose at his sides, his chin slightly forward in the posture of someone performing readiness. The area behind the rope was reserved for a ceremony, a general's ceremony, a reviewing stand ceremony, the kind with fresh flowers at the base of the wall and folding chairs arranged in the confident geometry of an event that has been managed. The ceremony would begin in 45 minutes. The area was closed to the general public until after. Henry Beaumont was 85 years old. He stood on the public side of the rope in a plain charcoal suit that had been pressed with the care of a man who understands that certain days require certain things. A white shirt and a dark tie he had knotted that morning in front of a mirror with the slow deliberateness of a man who has not forgotten how. His shoes were black, polished to a quiet depth that did not announce itself. On his lapel, a single pin, small, dark with age, the kind of thing that looks to most people like a service organization badge and looks to certain other people like something else entirely. His hands were at his sides, brown, large-knuckled, the skin of a man who has lived in his hands, the fingers steady with the stillness that belongs to people who have made their peace with most things. He was looking at the wall. The wall was black granite, the names cut into it in the particular way that names are cut into memorial walls, each one a weight that the stone carries without flinching. Henry Beaumont was looking at a specific section of it, a specific cluster of names from a specific year, with a quality of attention that is not grief exactly, but contains grief the way a river contains everything that has ever flowed into it. He had not moved when the guard spoke. "Sir," the guard stepped forward, his voice finding the edge between polite and firm. "The public viewing area is behind the secondary barrier. This section is restricted until after the ceremony." Henry Beaumont looked at the guard with eyes that were pale blue, the color of a winter sky over open ground, carrying a depth that made the guard, for one brief moment, want to step back rather than forward. He didn't step back. He was young, and he had a job to do. "I know some of these men," Henry said. His voice was low and level, the register of a man who has said many things in his life and has learned to save his voice for the ones that matter. "I'd like a few minutes with them before the ceremony." "Sir, I understand, but the policy is there a senior officer available?" Henry said. Not a challenge. A question asked the way a man asks a question, when he already knows the answer will require something from whoever supplies it. "Sir, I really need you to." A second guard materialized at the first one's shoulder, older, a supervisor, a woman in her 40s named Carter, who had been doing event security at Fort Bragg for 11 years, and who had the eyes of a person who has seen many things and has learned to read the ones that don't announce themselves. She looked at Henry Beaumont. She looked at the pin on his lapel. Something moved in her face, not recognition exactly, more the shadow of recognition, the specific unease of a person who suspects they are misreading a situation and cannot yet articulate why. "Sir," Carter said, more gently, "the area opens to all visitors in 45 minutes. If you'd like to take a seat in the public." The young guard, emboldened by his supervisor's arrival, interpreting her presence as validation, put his hand on Henry Beaumont's arm. Not roughly. A directing pressure, the hand of a man guiding a person away from a place they are not supposed to be. "Right this way, sir." The smell of cut grass and granite dust fell away. He was 19 years old. He was lying in a bomb crater in the Ia Drang Valley, Vietnam, November 1965, and the world had been reduced to its essential elements: the ground, the sound, the men around him, and the particular decision that a 19-year-old should not have been required to make, and was making anyway. His platoon had been cut off for 6 hours. The radio was working intermittently. The man who had been carrying the primary radio, Corporal James Whitfield, 20 years old, from Decatur, Georgia, who had a photograph of his mother in his breast pocket, and who had described the peach cobbler she made in such specific detail that 3 other men in the platoon had made up their minds to visit Decatur after the war, was dead, and the radio was still functional, and Henry had picked it up. The situation, as Henry understood it from the communications he could piece together through the intermittent signal, was that a relief element was inbound but could not establish the platoon's position with sufficient accuracy for fire support without a ground-level signal. Henry had a signal mirror and a smoke canister, and the open ground between the crater and the tree line was approximately 40 meters of the most consequential 40 meters he had yet encountered in his 19 years. He went. He went because the math was simple even if it was terrible. The 40 meters was survivable or it wasn't. But remaining in the crater was a certainty. He went with the signal mirror and the smoke, and he crossed the open ground in the particular way that fear produces in a person who has decided to do the thing fear is arguing against. Not fast, not reckless, but with the low and steady motion of a man who has made a decision and is executing it without the luxury of changing his mind. He got across. He signaled. He popped the smoke. The fire support came in. He went back. 12 men in that platoon walked out of the Ia Drang Valley. On the way back across the open ground, a round caught him in the right shoulder, and he finished the crossing anyway, because he had started, and stopping was not a conclusion available to him at that moment. In the medical station afterward, a first sergeant named Calvin Dubois, a large, weathered man from Memphis who had 2 tours of Korea behind him and who cried at exactly one point in Henry's account, which was the part about Whitfield and the peach cobbler, had sat at the edge of his cot and listened without interrupting, and then sat in silence for a moment. "You know what you did," Dubois said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Henry said. Dubois reached into his breast pocket and produced a small pin, dark metal. An insignia that Henry did not recognize, but that Dubois handled with the careful deliberateness of an object with considerable weight. He held it out. "My platoon sergeant gave this to me outside Incheon in 1950, Dubois said. "He told me, every time you wonder whether it was worth it, you remember that the men who walked out are living their whole lives because you made the decision you made." He placed it in Henry's hand. "You're going to need to remember that. It's going to be a long remembering." Henry held the pin. Dubois stood and straightened his uniform and walked out of the medical station with the bearing of a man who has deposited something he has been carrying a long time into the right hands. Calvin Dubois was killed 3 weeks later on a road outside Placo. He was 43 years old. He had a daughter in Memphis who was 7. Henry Beaumont blinked. The memorial wall came back, the granite, the names. The guard's hand was on his arm. Private First Class Darnell King was 22 years old and had been assigned to the ceremony's honor detail for 3 days and had spent the last 20 minutes watching the situation at the rope line with a quality of attention that had begun as idle observation and had become something else entirely. He had noticed the old man when he arrived. The suit, the polished shoes, the particular quality of stillness that certain old men carry that is different from other kinds of stillness. He had noticed the pin on the lapel, and the moment the old man turned slightly and the morning light caught it, and he had seen what the pin was. Pefsi King's grandfather had a photograph on the wall of his study. In the photograph, a young man stood in dress uniform in front of a building, and on his lapel was the same pin, and his grandfather had told him what it meant in a voice that had not been entirely steady. King had never seen that pin on a living person before this morning. He looked around the staging area. Sergeant First Class Torres was 20 yards away, reviewing the ceremony order with the efficiency of a woman who has managed 11 military ceremonies this year and has the focus of someone who intends to manage 11 more. King crossed to her with the urgency of a man who has made a decision that cannot be unmade. "Sergeant Torres," he said. "Lo, the old man at the rope. I need you to look at his lapel pin." Torres looked at him. She had the specific measuring gaze of a person who distinguishes between interruptions that justify themselves and ones that don't, and she was deciding which this was. "Now, Sergeant," King said. "Please," she looked. She was 38 feet away. She squinted once, and then she was very still, and the ceremony order she was holding dropped slightly in her hand. She looked at King. "How sure are you?" "My grandfather has the same one," King said. "I'm sure." Torres was already moving. She walked to the base operations duty officer, Captain Renard, who was coordinating logistics for the ceremony near the reviewing stand, and she said 4 words to him that King could not hear from where he stood. What King could see was what happened to Renard's face when she said them. A stillness. Then, a reorientation. The specific expression of a man updating a fundamental assumption about the situation he is managing. Renard made a call. He was on the phone for 20 seconds. When he lowered it, he made another call immediately, and that call lasted 12 seconds, and when it ended, he put the phone in his pocket and turned to his aide and said something that caused the aide to walk quickly in the direction of the reviewing stand. Sergeant Major of the Army Dennis Vance was reviewing the morning's agenda in a tent near the reviewing stand when his aide came in and bent close and said a name, and then 3 other words. Vance looked up. The agenda came down. He stood without ceremony and said to the aide, "Find me the base commander." Brigadier General Sylvia Marsh, Post Commander Fort Bragg, was already moving. She had received the same information through a different route 30 seconds earlier, and she had been doing this long enough that she did not need to be told what it required of her. PFC King went back to his position near the rope and stood there with the weight of what was coming, watching the guard's hand still on Henry Beaumont's arm. Henry Beaumont had not moved. The hand on his arm communicated direction, and he had not followed the direction, and the guard had not yet decided what to do about that. Because the old man was not resisting in any way that provided a clear protocol, he was simply present, the way a fixed object is present, in a manner that made the application of pressure feel oddly beside the point. The young guard, his name was Mitchell, and he was 24. And he had taken this job 3 months ago, and he was doing his best, which was the truest thing that could be said about him, was formulating his next approach when he heard his supervisor Carter make a sound. Not a word. A sound, the particular involuntary sound that a person makes when what they are seeing requires a recalibration that is too large for immediate speech. He turned. They were coming from the direction of the reviewing stand. Not running, not hurrying in any way that would disturb the ceremony staging, but moving with a pace and a deliberateness that communicated something that is difficult to describe in words but impossible to miss. The pace of an institution mobilizing itself around a recognition of its own. At the front was PFC King, who had the expression of a man who knows what is coming and wants to be present for it. Behind him, Torres. Behind Torres, 3 more soldiers who had heard something and understood something and had made their way toward the rope without being told to, because the thing they understood required them to be present. Behind them, in dress uniform, moving with the contained purpose of a career, spent moving with contained purpose, Brigadier General Sylvia Marsh. She came through the ceremony staging area without altering her pace. Her eyes found Henry Beaumont from 40 yards out, and did not leave him. She moved past the reviewing stand, and past the folding chairs, and past the fresh flowers at the base of the wall, and she came to the rope line, and she did not stop at the rope line. She ducked under it. Mitchell's hand came off Henry Beaumont's arm. Brigadier General Sylvia Marsh, post commander of Fort Bragg, came to attention in front of Henry Beaumont and rendered the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute that Mitchell had ever seen anywhere, in any context, directed at any person. It was not a salute between equals. It was not a greeting. It was the full and unambiguous expression of an institution, acknowledging one of the things it was built on, rendered by the highest authority present in that space, directed at the old man in the charcoal suit. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. There was no collective gasp. What moved through the assembled soldiers and ceremony personnel was something quieter than a gasp and more complete, a stillness. The specific stillness of people who have just understood something that changes the way they are standing, the way they are breathing, the way they are occupying the space they are in. Henry Beaumont raised his right hand, large, steady, the right shoulder that had taken a round in November 1965 and had been useful every day since, and returned the salute with the precision of a man who has not forgotten how to do anything that matters. He lowered it. She lowered hers. Mitchell was holding both hands at his sides with the specific quality of a man who would very much like to be somewhere else. General Marsh turned. She did not raise her voice. She spoke at the volume of a woman accustomed to being heard when she speaks, which is a different thing from being loud. "This man's name is Henry James Beaumont," she said, "and I need every soldier present to hear what I'm about to say." She reached into her jacket and produced an index card, small, worn at the edges, the kind of card that a person keeps because it contains something they intend to carry. Henry Beaumont served with the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam from 1965 to 1969. 4 tours. He was 19 years old in November 1965 when his platoon was cut off in the Ia Drong Valley and the primary radio operator was killed. Henry picked up the radio. He crossed 40 meters of open ground under fire to signal a relief element's inbound position, ground that the after-action report describes as, quote, unsurvivable at the time of the crossing. He was wounded on the return. He completed the return. 12 men walked out of that valley. She paused. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for those actions, presented by the President of the United States in 1966. She looked at the gathered soldiers, King, Torres, the 3 others who had followed, the honor detail, the ceremony staff, Mitchell. The pin on his lapel is the Medal of Honor recipient lapel pin. He has been wearing it since 1966. She looked at Mitchell directly, and her voice did not change temperature. This memorial was built in part to honor the men of the 1st Cavalry Division who did not come back from Vietnam. Henry Beaumont carried some of them. He has been coming here on the anniversary of the Ia Drong battle for 22 years. She folded the index card. He will have as long as he needs. No one spoke. Then something happened that had not been planned and was not in any ceremony order and could not have been organized because it was not organization. It was recognition. PFC King came to attention. Torres came to attention. The 3 soldiers beside them came to attention. And then, in the particular way that genuine things move through a group of people when the thing is real enough, the honor detail came to attention, and the ceremony staff, and the soldiers near the reviewing stand who had been watching and now understood what they were watching. And they stood there in the November morning at Fort Bragg with the names on the wall behind them and faced Henry Beaumont and were still. Every soldier on the visible ground. Standing, Henry Beaumont looked at them, the pale blue eyes, the depth. He looked at them with the expression of a man receiving something he has not asked for and does not know what to do with, and understands, standing there, that the appropriate response is simply to let it be received. He turned to the wall. He walked to the names. He put his hand flat against the granite, in the cluster of names from 1965, and he stood there for a long time with his palm against the stone, and the soldiers behind him at attention, and the November morning around all of them. And nobody moved, and nobody spoke. And the weight of what had happened in that valley in 1965 was present in the space in the way that the weight of things is always present if you are standing in the right place with the right quality of attention. Mitchell was transferred to a different role in the security rotation the following week, not as a punitive measure, but as a reassignment recommended by Carter, who had spoken with him at length that afternoon and who believed, and said so in her note to the contractor, that he was a good young man who needed different responsibilities while he developed the judgment that this role required. He completed a mandatory training module on military credentials and honors recognition. He did not complain about either. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, at a coffee shop in Fayetteville that Mitchell stopped at on his way to a shift, he saw a charcoal suit at a corner table. He stood in line for his coffee for 2 minutes, holding what he knew and what he had done and what he intended to do about the gap between them. Then he carried his coffee to the corner table. "Mr. Beaumont," he said. Henry Beaumont looked up. The pale blue eyes, the depth that simply was what it was. "I owe you an apology," Mitchell said. He sat down without being invited, because waiting to be invited felt like another way of avoiding the thing. "What I did at the memorial, I had a rule and I applied it without thinking about what was in front of me. That was wrong. I put my hand on you, and that was wrong." He looked at the old man. "I'm sorry." Henry Beaumont looked at him for a long moment with eyes that did not perform their assessment, but conducted it thoroughly and without advertisement. "You were doing your job," Henry said. "You didn't know." "I should have looked more carefully," Mitchell said. "Yes," Henry said. Simply, not unkindly. The word of a man who respects the person across from him enough to agree with them when they are right. He slid his coffee cup slightly to the left, the small, unhurried gesture of a man making room at a table. And he picked up his cup, and he looked out the window at the Fayetteville morning, and he said, without looking back, "How's the coffee here?" "Good," Mitchell said. "Then drink it," Henry said. "You don't have to stand outside things forever." They sat for a while in the Saturday morning quiet. Henry Beaumont looked out the window. Mitchell drank his coffee. On the table between them, catching the light for a moment, the small dark pin. The men who cross the open ground are still crossing it. They are in coffee shops and at memorial walls, and they are wearing the small dark pin that most people look past. And they are carrying names in their hands that they will carry until they cannot carry anything anymore. And they do not ask to be seen, but they are present. And they have always been present. And the least we can do, the very least, is look. If you were moved by Henry's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. And click that notification bell so you never miss a story of the quiet warriors who walk among us.